All right, everybody, let's get started. Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Lunchtime Discovery Series. It's good to be with you for another edition of our program brought to you by the North Carolina Office of Environmental Education within the Department of Environmental Quality within the state of North Carolina, and us here at the Museum of Natural Sciences doing the broadcasting and the hosting. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in. Know that we are here most Wednesdays at noon with this program, giving you the opportunity to hear from interesting people who are doing really fascinating and interesting stuff out there in the world of science and nature and the environment, conservation, education, art, all of the above. So make sure that you've got Wednesdays at noon blocked off. Just go ahead and put them on the calendar, pen us in so that you can know to come right here to the museum's YouTube channel every week and take in what is always a great program. That also means that there's a fabulous archive of programs available to you as well. So right here on the YouTube channel, there's the Lunchtime Discovery playlist, lots of great talks and presentations and question and answer sessions where you can learn something new, something that will, I am certain, I guarantee, improve your life. It will do it. Learning new things will do that for you. I think we're going to do that this week as well, because we're going to be diving into a topic that, as I understand it, looking at the description and having the chance to talk to today's guest speaker just before the program, not a lot of folks know a lot about today's topic. And so, one, that makes us fortunate because we're going to have somebody who's really dove into this topic. But also, I think we might get the chance to participate in this as well. So let me bring on today's guest. Today, we're going to be hearing from Michelle Jewell. Michelle is a science communicator in the Department of Applied Ecology at North Carolina State University, a friend of the Lunchtime Discovery Series, who's presented here with us before. Michelle is also the president of the Science Communicators of North Carolina, or SCONC, and joins me now. Hey, Michelle.
Hey, Chris, thanks so much for that lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be back and to chat about some of my favorite topics with sharks. So thank you for the opportunity.
Very excited to hear what you've got to show today. Sharks are always a popular topic. They certainly capture the imagination. And I've seen some photos online. You've been very close to lots of sharks.
Yeah, I have. I've studied behavioral ecology of predators for many years. And one of my favorite predators to study are great white sharks. Why not?
I think some people would have some why nots, but I'm glad that you're out there doing the work. Excited for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, let me get everything together here and we can crack on. I think I've got it set up.
Looks good.
Great. Perfect. Okay. And I will also just tell everybody, again, thank you for tuning in. As Chris mentioned, that the talk that I have today is less scientific talk with a lot of answers and more a lot of questions and hypotheticals. And I would love to have your involvement in this talk with your questions and comments. Please throw them in the chat as we go along here. What's really exciting about breaching as a behavior is that it's definitely a topic that people have tried and looked at to try and answer, but it's one of these kind of unknowable issues with studying really large marine animals because they don't stay in one place for very long. They're very hard to get to do what you want them to do. So a lot of our work has to do with observations. Anytime you're trying to observe an oceanic animal, that means you have to spend a lot of time out there trying to get those observations in. People have tried. We can't keep white sharks in a lab, no matter how big the tank is. They don't do very well. Same for whales. Very, very hard to keep whales to try and do any sort of experimental looking into some of these observations. So with all of that, and repeating myself a little bit here, we'll move on. So again, my disclaimers are, if you've come here for complete answers, I don't have them, but we do have a lot of fun hypotheticals to think about. And some parts of this do involve my own personal observations, having spent over 15 years on the water, either as a whale watching guide, which is how I kind of got my start in the marine world, all the way up to the white shark research that I'm doing now. Okay, so let's talk about breaching itself. So some history here. Breaching is when waterborne animals basically jump out of the water, expend tons of energy, and then splash onto the surface of the water. It's a very common behavior, not just with sharks and whales, but aquatic fishes do this, rays do it, even sunfish are out there breaching like crazy. It's also really expensive behavior, and that's where a lot of behavioral ecologists like me look at it and go, because this is so expensive, it has to have a currency, a really high currency involved with it. What justifies the cost of flinging 40 tons of whale multiple feet into the air? There are 4 prevailing hypotheses when it comes to trying to explain this behavior in the wild, and I'm going to go through some of them now. So we have the parasite hypothesis, we have predator and prey hypotheses, and then we have social or communication hypotheses as well. So first, let's talk about parasites. Creepy crawlies. Maybe should have, it's a really good, Halloween topic to talk about some of these guys. So the parasite hypothesis, it originates mostly from folks who were studying marine mammals, and I think this picture gives a really good idea as to why its origins are with marine mammal folks. Healthy whales, this is a healthy whale. They have tons of parasites on them, and those parasites are very easy to observe, right? It does not take a microscope. It takes nothing more than taking a picture, even from your cell phone. I know from experience, you can get really good high definition pictures of these kind of crabby parasites that live on many whales, and also barnacles and etc. In fact, these patches of parasites are a really good way to identify certain individuals from a species. This is how southern right whale and northern right whale aerial observations identify different individuals. I also mentioned that you have certain species of whale have very specific barnacles that will attach to them and multiply in them too, like this gray whale has here. So you can kind of see, if you're looking at a breaching whale and you know that they have all these kind of creepy crawlies on them, there's a certain logic to it to understand that maybe as they jump, they're doing it in order to rid themselves of parasites. In fact, after you see a whale breach, which I've got one going on here, beautiful humpback whale, as a whale watching guide, I can tell you that once you rush over there after the whale has breached, you can often find some of those parasites on the water, and you'll find fluffs of their dead skin on the water too. In fact, spotting dead skin on the surface of the water is, if you've got a keen spotter, they'll tell you that there's breaching whales nearby. But with this parasite hypothesis, I think there's a little bit of human anti-parasite bias happening here. First, it's really important to remember that whales are huge, which means that their parasites are huge as well and very, very visible. So maybe that's leading us to believe that whales must be getting annoyed with the presence of parasites all over their faces. But they're not the only mammal that has parasites living all over their face. In fact, this little guy down here is our favorite little Dermadex mite. They are all over your face. They're all over my face. And that has nothing to do with hygiene. It has nothing to do with your status or health status. It's just a natural occurrence of what's happening on our faces. And if you blew a human up to the size of a whale, you would see those very obviously crawling around us too. So I'll ask you now, as you sit, maybe you're feeling a little itchy now, but as you sit in your seat now, you're probably not thinking, you know what, I need to go do a cannonball into a pool in order to get these mites off of me. They are just irritating me so much. No, they don't affect you. And I would reckon that for whales, those mites, even though they look big to us, they're probably not affecting their day-to-day lives either. They probably don't notice them, just in the same way that we don't notice the dermidex on our faces too. One of the further kind of nails in the coffin of the parasite hypothesis is this guy. This is the largest fish on the planet. This is a whale shark. Whale sharks can get up to 12 meters long, and they too get full of parasites. This guy's got a nice little beard of copepods going on here, and is a healthy whale shark. Whale sharks do not breach. It's never been documented. And there's a pretty good reason why they don't, which I'm going to catch up to at the end of this talk. But just keep in mind that we have this really big fish full of parasites, never breaches. So I'm fairly convinced that while sure, when you breach, you're going to maybe knock a few parasites that aren't paying attention off of you. This is probably more of a spandrel effect to breaching, meaning that it's not the main driver of the behavior, but it's a nice kind of added benefit to it, but it's not the main intention of the behavior itself. So moving on, we have the parasite hypothesis, which I just personally don't think applies to all these breaching behaviors. Here we have pictured in the same frame both the predator and the prey hypotheses, where a good last-ditch effort to get away from a predator is to jump into the air, out of the water, which is something that we see shoaling fish do all the time. Equally, a really good way to catch some prey is to force them to the surface, like this sailfish and these seals have done. And then sailfish will often ram through schools of these fish, breaching the surface as well. Sailfish and tuna love to do this, which is a very good way to actually find these schools at the surface of the water. So there's some weight that holds here too, true here too, for this hypothesis in these situations. White sharks in South Africa also famously breach from the surface to catch seals at aggregation sites. I'm sure you've probably seen something like this on TV before. Really important to note is that the sharks that do this, not all great white sharks do this. This is a behavior that's been really specific to South Africa. It has been noted in other aggregation locations, but this is really much a South African behavior where you could normally see so many breaches in one day. But there's a problem with the predator hypothesis, and it's kind of on display here in this photo. My work specifically looked at anti-shark tactics of seals, Cape fur seals in South Africa. And what you can notice here is that this is a huge white shark. This is a massive, probably an adult white shark. And the seal next to it, some of the seal experts in the room might be able to spot that this is a young of the year seal. It's a very small individual, not a lot of fat. The other thing that's happening in this picture, it is totally missing that seal. And in fact, behavioral research, not done by me, but colleagues and friends in South Africa, documented that white sharks miss this type of behavior. They miss the seal about 70 to 80% of the time, which is pretty high miss rate. So even if this white shark in this frame caught this tiny seal, the caloric intake versus the amount of calories that it's expending, not only in this attempt, but all the prior failed attempts before it, there's still a mismatch between how much it's spending versus how much it might be gaining from that seal meal. So there still must be something else. There still must be a different weight or a different currency driving this type of behavior. So I'm pretty suspicious of the predator hypothesis for this behavior with white sharks in South Africa. Plus, this behavior or this hypothesis doesn't explain breaching as we normally see it, which is when there are no prey species or predators around. I'll give you a really great example here of a basking shark breaching for the heck of it. Why not? If you're a basking shark, go for it. I remember when these images first came out, people were blown away at the idea of a basking shark breaching because they're thought to be really slow, kind of cumbersome sharks that eat krill. You know, there's no reason for it to be breaching on krill. It also doesn't explain why some species breach over and over and over again, like this whale is about to show us. They'll do it in quick succession over and over again. It's got one. This is probably his second already breach. There was a bit of a footprint behind. Going to give us a chin slap after this as well. And whales typically do this. This is why, actually, there are so many great pictures of whales breaching, because as a photographer, you're going to get 3 or 5 chances to get that shot before they finally stop breaching. So again, they do it over and over and over again. It also doesn't explain the predator hypothesis. It doesn't explain that most non-predatory breaching across all species happens at aggregation sites around conspecifics. And it also doesn't explain that the majority of individuals across whales and sharks that participate in breaching are males. Usually, it's rare. They do it sometimes, but usually it's the males that are breaching, not the females. So let's go back to the basking shark. I couldn't give this talk without showing you this incredible footage that came out, I think, a year ago or maybe 2 years ago. Maybe some of you have already seen this on YouTube. If you haven't, oh my goodness, get ready. Hold on to your seats. You're about to get blown away. This was a diver's footage. Tourist group that was out diving with an aggregation of basking sharks. You're going to see a big school of basking sharks in the water. And researchers in the UK, in Ireland, have established that those aggregations are most likely mating opportunities. What's happening there, we don't really know. But that schooling behavior has been seen in basking sharks and other species of shark, and it's thought to be a pretty good indication of a mating something happening here. So let me go ahead and play it because it's amazing. See, they're chilling. And look at this guy rocketing from the bottom. No one ever thought basking sharks did that. That is an incredible behavior. One more time for the people in the back. Look at him. Out of nowhere, male basking shark. Huge splash, almost takes out a diver on his way. What an incredible way to get attention in an aggregation with lots of conspecifics. Some of them you're trying to attract, some of them you're competing with. Okay, let's skip along. Oh. Come on. No, I want to go into the next slide here. Uh-oh. Technical difficulties. Skip along. Hold on here, folks. The footage is amazing, but we don't want to keep seeing it, you know? No, that's going to take me to another video. Come on. Hold on, folks. Delay. Let me try and fix this real quick. I'm gonna skip past my other YouTube and then go right past it. Okay. The other video that I wanted to share with you as well was a similar looking type of video, but had manta rays. Manta rays do the exact same thing where they breach regularly. Okay, we should be back on screen. Looks good. Great. Okay. So manta rays too, when they're in aggregation sites, they absolutely go for it. And often what you see is individuals breaching kind of around this aggregation of other manta rays. And again, most of those manta rays that are breaching are males, typically not females. It's not that they're suddenly itchy with parasites, right? That can't be what's motivating the behavior here. There must be, in my opinion and the opinion of others, there must be some sort of social or communication thing occurring, especially in these non-predatory situations, which is when the majority of breaching happens. So what could that potential function be? For the experiment that we wanted to set up, we thought that hitting the water, if you're a big animal, hitting the water, you make an incredibly loud noise. Even the sunfish on the side, another slow lumbering species that people didn't think breached, they breach as well. A splash at the surface of the water, also the noise that it creates is a very low frequency noise, which low frequency noises travel even further through the water column than high frequency noises. Reminder that sound moves about 5 times faster through the water than it does in air. And every species I've shown you that breaches or has been breaching, they all have ears or some sort of ear structure within their heads too. So they have an ability to take in auditory cues. This has kind of been a weird thing with some species of shark, like white sharks, because folks haven't really understood why that ear function is still in place. Perhaps if we think about breaching as an honest signal, and this is a term from behavioral ecology, where it's a signal that cannot be faked. There's no way to impersonate a breach without investing the calories to make that splash, that perhaps the size and the sound of a splash correlates with the size of a body, and that might be sending out a cue to anybody who's listening about the size, strength, and fitness of that animal. This could be information for conspecifics, like we were talking about before, your competitors in an aggregation, and potentially a signal to attract mates or attract a mating aggregation and getting one started. This fitness idea is a prevailing hypothesis for humpback whales, which have been studied extensively, especially in their mating aggregation areas. Most of the whales breaching in those areas too are the male humpback whales. We also know that male humpback whales sing incredibly elaborate songs in mating aggregations too, because they're in a fiercely competitive area with a lot of other males competing for a limited amount of females. But no one yet had thought about applying the same type of framework to sharks. And I think that's because we're just not used to thinking about sharks as social animals, even though recently tons of research has come out on the social structure of certain shark species, hierarchies of shark species. Even some white sharks have been documented to travel together in pairs. And when we say together, it's not like they're swimming right next to each other, but they're swimming nearby each other as they're migrating. So for our experiment, we set out to take that fitness breaching framework that's been applied to humpback whales and apply it to the white sharks in South Africa and see if anything would stick. And it was a really exciting type of project. So we wanted to utilize a playback experiment where we would record the sounds of breaching, and then we would play those back to sharks in the water and see if their behavior changed in any way. This is a really tried and true type of experimental setup with birds. Even with whales, they played back songs to see if that would elicit behavior, and it does. If you're out birding and you're trying to see an owl, really good way to find an owl is to pretend to be a screech owl. Other owls will come in and try and scare you away. So yeah, we knew that this was a system that would work really well, but we didn't know if anything would happen with sharks. So how did we do it? Well, white sharks, luckily, are very easy to elicit to breach. If you have a decoy that looks convincing enough, if you have the right day, the right conditions, the right hour, you can get a shark to do a breach like this, which we were able to get a few while we were in South Africa. Attached to the line, so the shark that's upside down is going after a decoy, which is right next to it on the right-hand side. That decoy is attached to the boat with a very thin piece of fishing wire because we just want to be able for it to rip just in case the shark really goes for it. We don't want the boat going down with it. And then along that line, we attached a hydrophone piece or a microphone so that we could get the sound of the splash once the shark landed on the water again. Again, this is a predatory breach that's happening, so it may not hit the same way that a non-predatory breach might, but this was our kind of pilot study beginning way to collect something that we could use in the field later. So already, if you're starting to flag that maybe there's a problem here, you're right. There is a little bit of a flaw with the experimental design here. But we were able to successfully capture the sound of a breach. And as you can tell, this is part of a film shoot. We were also able to get the sound of whales breaching, but this time we went to Dominica and we were collecting the sounds of sperm whales breaching and also echolocating under the water. I was telling Chris before this, I've done tons of spooky stuff in the water. I've been in the water with some pretty big sharks. I have never been more scared than I was here. I've actually never been scared in the water until this. Having a 40-ton sentient sonar machine swimming next to you while it is collecting information about you was a pretty wild experience. But here again, we were able to get some knowledge here from them. I'm telling Kane, let's go away because they are getting way too close. We're not moving, they're coming towards us to get us a good picture. And so we started to swim away here. So we got a breach of a whale too. So we have a white shark breach, a whale breach, and then of course we collected some audio of nothing happening so that we had a control as well. Armed with all of these audio files, essentially, my colleague, Dr. Enrico Gennari in South Africa, stayed on the surface and he was manning the turntables, we were saying. He was DJ Enrico and was playing back some of the audio to the speaker that was down under the water. Since we were working in South Africa, visibility in South Africa can be really, really poor. So a really good way to observe white sharks is not to stay at the surface, but to get down below the water. So I headed into a cage to see if I could spot any differences in what the sharks were doing based on the sounds that we were playing back out. So what happened? Well, nothing definitive. And let me again say, nothing definitive. But what we did see was when we played the sounds of, well, first let me start by saying we started by chumming the water. So again, experiment flaw-ish, where we're trying to attract sharks to the boat with a mixture of fish oils and other things. A big myth I hear all the time is that people think that we use like cow blood and other things to chum. This is a Jaws thing. It's not true. It doesn't actually even work. Fish oil, anchovy oil is your thing that you want to use for chum. Anyway, so we would chum to get sharks around the boat, and then we would randomly play back some of these audio files and see what would happen. So we had, at the time, a smaller juvenile shark around the boat. We were playing back some of the breaching noises, and that shark moved away from the boat about 50 meters or so and was doing small circles at the surface, but was not coming back to the boat, which we thought was really interesting. Again, one-off observation, not true science, but the very beginnings of what could be some really good true science. The second thing we noticed is as we were doing some of these playback experiments, especially when the whale breach, which is a longer duration and a louder noise, was being played in the water, we had a very large female white shark show up to the boat. Again, preliminary observation, maybe she could have been heading to the boat anyway. We were chumming, but it was really fascinating to see as that breach was being played, the small shark keeping its distance and this very big female coming to the surface to see what was going on. There's some things here that make sense. If we ride with the assumption that the breaching noises did have an impact on the sharks, it makes sense for a smaller shark to hear the noise of maybe a larger conspecific and stay away. Something that you won't learn on TV and is a myth as well is that you might think that great white sharks primarily eat seals as part of their diet. They don't. Seals make up a very small portion of their diet. Sharks this size primarily eat other sharks. So it makes sense for a smaller shark to hear the sound of a big conspecific and stay away. If we ride with the assumption that that breaching noise could be attracting mates. Again, makes a lot of sense that really big female racked up. She's huge, so she's not really threatened by the sound of a conspecific, but she probably wants to come and see who's around. It could be an indication of a potential mate. We think white sharks might be mating around seal colonies. It also could be an indication of a meal, that maybe there's some food happening. Maybe there's an attack happening and she can maybe come in and move people off the carcass and take it for herself. So there could be something happening there. Again, it's not a known, but it was a very exciting situation to see this play out. Both myself and Enrico, we've worked on the water with white sharks for an extremely long time. And both of us were shocked to see that the behavior of the smaller shark, to see him move away but stay at the surface, thinning at the surface, staying close but staying far away. That was something that neither Dr. Enrico Gennari and I had observed before. Seeing that large female was also very, very cool. But the problem that occurred, so again, the thing about field research is you can have the best equipment, the best expertise, you can have the best weather, the best boat, best everything, and then something else can come along and ruin it. And for our case, something did come along and ruin our experiment, and that was the orcas of South Africa. There's a really interesting situation playing out in South Africa right now where white sharks are being attacked at an incredible rate by orcas that are coastal. This is a really common occurrence along California, but this has never happened in recorded history in South Africa for orcas to predate on white sharks. So what happens is orcas move in, they hunt white sharks, they only eat the liver of the white shark, they don't eat anything else. We researchers will have carcasses strand on the beach that literally have a puncture in their chest, like what this orca is doing to that white shark, and the liver is gone, everything else is intact. It's spooky. They're picky eaters, and they will eat lots of sharks when they move into a bay. This also means that the white sharks move into defense mode where they don't come to the surface. They are not, doesn't matter what you're chumming with, they are not coming to the boat. So it really put a kibosh to our observational research that we wanted to do. And sadly, since the orcas have moved in, white shark sightings in this area of South Africa have completely tanked. They're just not there anymore, or they're not willing to come to the surface to be observed and counted. I'm going to skip this video just because the other one gave us so many problems here. So with that, I'll say, if you are a researcher that's interested in this topic, interested in looking at it specifically with white sharks, or have another idea for a study species or area, I am all ears, because unfortunately our study area did get ruined by the presence of orcas. And we had some pretty cool observations when it came to how these animals were reacting to the breaching noise. I would love to one day try and do playback experiments with this with whales to see what their reactions might be. It's another pretty good species that we could get access to. But yeah, there's a lot still to happen with this type of research. A lot of the flaws in this design need to be addressed and repeated. And that's what we know is critical to science, is that process of repeating and seeing the same observations, and then we can really start to develop a hypothesis. So at this point, I hope you've been thinking about it. I hope the wheels have been turning. I would love to take some of your questions, and we'll have a little discussion, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about whale sharks. I haven't forgotten. We'll come back to the whale sharks at the end too.
All right. Fascinating stuff. Thank you, Michelle. I'm intrigued. I want to know that. I'm trying to jump ahead. I'm just like, what's the answer? Even though I know we don't have the answer.
We don't. But there's quite a few bits of observation here happening that I think gives more evidence towards communication in a social feature. That would also explain the gap that we have with predatory breaching with white sharks, where even if they caught a seal every single time, it doesn't make up for the amount of calories that they're burning. But if they're doing that as a way to also indicate their fitness to potential mates, now suddenly that is a much more valuable behavior than just getting a meal. Because the type of stuff that they're doing, it's almost like, running a marathon and 1 out of 5 chances that there might be a single donut at the end of it. And that's it. But you have to run it 5 times to find out. So there's a real big mismatch between just the predatory hypothesis for explaining that type of behavior.
Wow. Does that metaphor hold up? It's that much of a caloric expenditure? Or?
I haven't done the one-to-one
okay.
for that, but as an example.
but it's a big outlay for little reward.
Right.
Regardless, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a really fascinating study, I think it was in Australia, where they did an actual, there's going to be somebody who knows these words better in the chat, I hope, but where you actually take a thing and you burn it up to get the calories associated with that. And they did that with seals and other bits of like marine mammal to actually count the calories of getting a seal. And it wasn't that much. It really wasn't impressive.
Okay, interesting. All right, let's take a look at what's happening over here in the chat on YouTube or the Facebook comments, wherever folks happen to be viewing. So if you haven't left anything there for us yet, go ahead and jump in, folks. Let's see. So some folks, they're trying to get more information here before they make a determination, it sounds like. So one of our viewers wants to know, when it comes to the white sharks breaching for seals and missing, do you think that them protecting their eyes while breaching affects the accuracy?
Ooh, great question. No, and I'll tell you the fascinating reason why not. So white shark, let me go back to that picture, actually. This will help us with a little bit of an explanation here. Okay, so white sharks are a little bit different. What you're thinking about is when sharks will go to attack something. Some species of shark have something called a nictating membrane, which is an eyelid that essentially rolls back and protects their eyes from being damaged. White sharks don't have a nictating membrane, but they do still roll their eyes backwards so that the important bits are at least covered up slightly. And you can see here, his eye is like half rolled backwards, so he still has a little bit of vision. But nonetheless, they don't use vision once they get close enough. Once they get to that point of impact, their sensory actually switches from vision to all electric sense. So in the nose of that white shark, they have tiny little pores that if you actually squeeze at them, there's a jelly that comes out of them. And that jelly picks up electric fields all around them. Different species of shark have different ranges for how far that electric field will reach. Hammerhead sharks have a huge range, and that's why their head is shaped that way, almost like a big satellite dish, picking up a whole bunch of electric signals. But for white sharks, they have a very honed, short-range electric field that's very high definition. So once they get to that point of impact, they switch completely over to electric sense. And that's basically like a third eye for them, where they can target straight onto where that seal is, even when that seal is doing its best to get away. So they are highly evolved to catch really mobile and fast prey because they're able to switch to all these different senses. It's a great question and a really cool explainer for how different white sharks can be from other species of shark as well.
All right, there you go. Okay, the next one that I have here for you, do whales and other species breach more often, you think, when vessels or aircraft are around?
Really good question. So I had a master's student, oh gosh, do I age myself? 10 years ago. My master's student and I were looking at this, and what we found with southern right whales specific to South Africa is we found that breaching would occur more often when the weather was bad. So what we did was we compared observations from boats and observations that were land-based, with binoculars looking out into the ocean, especially on rough seas when there are no boats on the water. We actually found that whales were breaching more. our hypothesis there too was that we think that that may also serve a really important communication purpose. When the water is rough, it makes it really hard to see in the water. The visibility goes way down. And especially during the season when we were doing this research, it was a lot of cow-calf pairs or mother and baby pairs. And we found that when they would get far enough away from each other, when they, potentially couldn't see each other anymore, is when they would start to breach and then reconnect again. So we do know that weather plays an important role, specifically wind speed and how choppy the water is, plays a specific role in whether or not or how often whales do breach. I remember as a whale watching guide, again, 100 years ago, when we would have tourists come and the weather would be bad, and I would say to them, listen, if you trust us and you take your seasickness pills, I promise you, we're going to show you something you have never seen before, because the whales are just incredibly active. When the water is very calm, that's when a lot of marine mammals take advantage of that sea state in order to sleep and to rest. So they just sit there like logs. But man, if it's choppy out there and you can go whale watching, that is definitely the time to do it.
There you go. Pro tip, everybody, on your next trip to the coast. Okay, let's see here. Kim wants to know if you think they breach because they're playing.
Yeah, and that's a great explanation too, and that falls underneath the social kind of currency for this as well. Definitely in the case of calf whales, I think that plays a huge role, that they're just out there figuring out how to do it, getting strength from it, having a lot of fun. I think there's certainly a very important role for fun and a lot of social behavior, and that many more species have social structures than maybe we're used to thinking about. So absolutely, fun could be a part of this too. But again, when we start to think about why adults or more mature animals would do this behavior, then we have to start thinking about that caloric loss that they're taking on, because you can have too much fun and then end up really, really, really hungry, right? So there's definitely a role in there somewhere for sure, 100%. Hard to test, but 100% it's there.
Okay, all right. Okay, are there any reliable study sites where you could pivot to studying the breaching behavior in mantas or other rays? Since there are also elasma branches, the mechanism may be more similar than in whales.
That's a fantastic idea. I mean, gosh, I would love to have a study site in Baja California, which is where a lot of that type of ray jumping happens that's been documented. Listen, I'll take it. If that person wants to hop on as a co-collaborator, let's do it.
Listen, I'm up for it. I'm not dive certified, never worked with fish, but you know what? Yeah, sign me up. Okay, let me get some more for you here. There's a lot that came in. Okay, do females have certain mating calls that are at the same frequency as the sound of a vessel that a male would mistake for a female?
Wow, really good question. So in the shark world, and this is specific to white sharks I'm talking about now, whales is a similar but different story. For female white sharks, the act of mating is pretty rough. It's a pretty risky behavior for females, because the way that males will attach to a female is to actually bite onto the gill and to demobilize her so that they can mate, which is pretty gruesome when you see it. So it's less likely that a female would want to attract males to her because of that risky behavior. It's much more likely that a male would want to advertise to a female his presence and his level of fitness for her to maybe be attracted to them. One of the lines of thought that I've gone with this idea too is that, like what we saw with the juvenile sharks staying far away when that breaching sound is being played, male white sharks may not only be breaching to signal that they're the strongest or the biggest, stay out of my zone because I'm the biggest male here, but that also might be a signal to females that there's only one male here. Like, this is a kind of safer area for you to aggregate because there's just the one primary male and that you won't have to fight off other ones. So it's a little bit less likely that females would want to attract males in this system just because the way that the mating system works out.
Good thoughts. Good thoughts there, though.
Yeah, great question.
All right. Is there any way that the sounds of the large animal breaching could have encouraged the presence of the orcas? There's a lot of questions where it's like, Michelle, is it your fault?
Yeah, it's unlikely. But the orcas had been observed kind of nearby for a while. So we don't think that we necessarily had an influence there. They kind of come in and out when they know that white sharks are present anyway. And that's also when we researchers like to show up, is when the white sharks are present in order to be able to do some of the experiments. So we definitely overlap with the orcas a lot because we're both trying to achieve the same thing of finding white sharks. We just have very different reasons for wanting to find white sharks. So we don't think it had much of an influence on the orcas. But yeah, I mean, until you test it, you can't absolutely say no, but I'm like 99% sure no.
And then let's see, you were talking about doing this work in and around South Africa. Have you worked with OSearch, the shark research vessel?
Yeah, they came down to South Africa in 2012, and that was a large satellite tagging campaign that was in Mossel Bay, in Hansby, which is the main area that I worked in False Bay as well. I think all in all, there was like, I'm forgetting, between 20 and 30 white sharks were tagged during that campaign. So yeah, we were part of the study sites that they came to.
Cool, fascinating. We've had them on the show too a few times. This seems like fun stuff. All right, let's see what else I've got going on here. I'm actually just kind of curious. You mentioned getting in a cage to be underwater with the white sharks and then swimming away quickly from the whales.
Right.
This has less to do with breaching, but can you give us a sense of what it's really like to be in the water with these animals?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that this is going to sound weird, but my bread and butter is sharks. So I'm very familiar and comfortable with being in the water with sharks, especially white sharks. I find that they are, for the most part, pretty obvious about their intentions. For the most part, I've been surprised a few times. So that's why I stay in a cage and I don't get out into the water with them. But honestly, the sperm whale situation was so exciting. It was so hard to breath hold during that time because your heart is just racing. It was fascinating to be near something that's just so big and so, I don't know, capable. And here I am, just this human in a wetsuit, like trying to keep up with it. And the whales are barely moving and you are having to just absolutely go for it to try and get anywhere close. So yeah, it's definitely all in all a test of managing your mind, keeping that anxiety into a place that's helpful for you and that you can use it. But I think it takes a little bit of training in that. I've luckily had a lot of reasons to do it.
That is fascinating.
I'll say, Chris, honestly, a question I get a lot is about, sharks and how dangerous they are. They're really not. Of all the work that I've done out on the water, doing all sorts of things, the only times where injuries have happened on the boat and with the cage. Like those are actually the scariest things to deal with. Sharp stuff on boats and cages. Sharks are very chill.
Good to know. So tell me a little bit about this whale shark business.
So this is a really fascinating situation and something that I have been chatting. Oh gosh, it's going to do it to me again. Chatting with my whale shark friends about. I'm just going to go ahead and stop and get back to this again. So while I was doing a little bit of research, I was thinking, okay, well, let's list out all the big fish, all the big things, in the ocean, and let's put a check mark next to them. Do they breach or don't they? And this incredible exception is whale sharks. They don't They've never been observed breaching. It's thought that they probably don't. Again, always willing to be proven wrong with this type of thing. But there might be a really good reason as to why not. So whale sharks, even though they're huge and even though they're at the surface of the water-ish, they do deep dive, but a lot of the stuff that we see is in the surface waters. They're carpet sharks, which is a type of deep water shark. They're just this kind of weird exception in the carpet shark family that went way up into the water column and then just got massive as an animal. So if breaching has social and communication roots, then you wouldn't expect an animal that's evolved from the ocean floor to know anything about breaching, right? Because that is not at all a part of their behaviors. It's not a part of their way of attracting mates. They're bottom-dwelling sharks. They have other ways of doing that. So again, this is how I think it's kind of not only the nail in the coffin for the parasite hypothesis, but it's also potentially a really good point of evidence towards social and communication as to why these guys don't do it, because they're just not part of that surface ocean animal complex, right? It's not part of their society almost. So it's fascinating. They get tons of parasites. These guys are loaded, but they don't breach. It's not a part of their behavior.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Isn't that cool?
That's a fun wrinkle in the story. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, so then this looks like there's a couple other questions that came in, but now I'm curious, like what would be, so if you were going to design the next study or the next series of studies, what's the line of evidence that would confirm this social and communication function, for other shark researchers who are maybe thinking predator and prey and parasites?
Yeah, so a lot of it, to tackle the social and communication side of the experiments first, the critical piece of that is to have reliable presence of sharks in a place where researchers can access relatively easy. That always is the problem with studying really large marine animals. They don't care that we want to study them. They don't work on our timelines. They have their own ocean business to get to. So first identifying those types of study sites that could work is the biggest challenge. So say we find one, say we find an area where, like South Africa 15 years ago, where we could find white sharks reliably all the time, then we could set up a similar type of experiment that we've done to our pilot study, refine some of the issues that we had, like the speaker was maybe not appropriate. The playbacks were a little bit, I don't know, there's some fine tuning I'd like to do with the nuts and bolts of the actual speaker system. And then we would do the same thing where we'd randomize the playback and then have different observers check and see and monitor what types of behaviors they're observing, compare that back to the log of what audio is being played at that time, and then see if there were any behavioral changes that happened during those different playbacks. And you'd want to do that again and again and again and again. And the more times you repeat that study, if you see the same trends play out every time, then you can have really strong evidence for that hypothesis. So really what we need is just that consistency of a study site and a study animal, and fine-tuning some of those playback experiment setup designs, but then a lot of time to just do it again and again, different seasons, different times in their life history, to see if those trends play out or if they don't. And that's some of the risk when it comes to behavioral studies, is that we could do a ton of research into this, and then after, say, 3 years, we come back and we go, you know what, maybe, but it wasn't clear. It's always a risk. You have a science that maybe just doesn't work out. But I think from this pilot study and from what we observed with the white sharks in South Africa, I think there's a really strong case for this to be some cool research. So yeah, steal this idea. Please go out there and do it.
Well, right, and like because you could do it at white shark sites all over the world and just collect so much more information that way.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
everybody.
with a infinite budget, Chris, I would do it at all of the different white shark sites, including the far offshore ones that are very hard to access, and you need a ship and you need a crew to get out there. But yeah, the realistic situation is that most of the coastal areas where South Africa or where white sharks are aggregating at have a threat of one way or another, or just difficult to access for some reason or not. So it's a challenge, and that big challenge is just finding that spot where that experiment could actually run for a long enough time.
All right, got you. Another question that came in for you. Is there a way for people to see or watch these playback experiments?
Well, what a great planted question.
I'm like, who's watching this? Do they know? Do they know?
Yes, I mean, so this work was done as part of our my most recent Shark Week show. To give you the full commercial rundown, it's available for streaming on Discovery Plus. You can find it on there. The title of the show was Great White Battlegrounds is the title of the show. And you can see a little bit of these playback experiments play out. And the stuff that we did with the whales in Dominica as well. Gorgeous show, highly recommend it, but of course I would. So you can find it on Discovery.
Excellent. There you go, everybody. real live Shark Week superstar on the Lunchtime Discovery today. All right, a couple of minutes left, so some short ones came in. I think this is about the sperm whales. Could you feel their voices vibrate through your body?
Yes. And I was not prepared for this. This was something I was told was going to happen, but it doesn't matter how many times somebody tells you it's going to happen, you still feel it. And it's what's cool about sperm whales. I mean, 100 things are cool about them, but what's very cool about them is when they're at the surface, they're resting from their diving. They dive for 45 minutes or so at a time while they're hunting squid. While they're diving, us on the boat, about 3,000 feet up, up in the water column at the surface from where they're 3,000 feet below us. We would track where they're at based on them clicking and echolocating at the bottom. So we would try and get into an area where we think they are most prevalent at. And then on the hydrophone, they will just suddenly go quiet. Nothing happening. And that's when you know that they've stopped hunting and they're coming to the surface. So that's when everybody on the boat starts looking around to see if we can spot where the sperm whales are. And then once you're in the water with them, they are scanning you. They're trying to figure out what you are. There was a really cool situation where, well, to step back for some of the physiology here, they echolocate and then they receive that sonar through their jaw line. They have a really specialized nerve that runs along their jaw, and that's their ear for sonar. And I had a situation where a sperm whale came straight up towards us, echolocating like crazy, and then dove and went underneath us with its jaw facing us the entire time. So it was getting like, it was going like this to us as it was diving underneath. It was getting a really high definition picture of us. And that was just so wild to have a 40-ton animal, largest teeth in the ocean, come dive underneath you just to get like a closer look. It was crazy.
Ooh, that gives me chills to think about. Wow. All right, last one that I've got for you. Are you going to go cage diving with the orcas next time?
Oh, well, I mean, it's funny, Chris and I were just talking about this. Maybe there's definitely some very cool sites with orcas. I'm really interested in the Norway aggregation of orcas because they are mostly fish hunting orcas, mostly with an asterisk next to it. We've chatted about the potential of going up there, maybe doing some stuff, but stay tuned. We'll see what happens.
All right. Well, if folks want to stay tuned, how can they follow you?
I'm easy to find. I'm the Sharkologist on Twitter. Also on Instagram. Not brave enough for a TikTok yet, but maybe one day. But yeah, find me online, tweet me your questions. I'm so happy to answer. If you have really specific scientific questions too, you want some publications, tweet me. I'll send those your way as well.
Excellent stuff. Everybody, great big round of applause for Michelle today. Fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure. I'll see you again soon, hopefully.
I hope so. Hope so. Folks, thanks for being here today. You can catch us again most Wednesdays. We'll be here next week as well at noon right here at the museum's YouTube channel. You can subscribe to the channel, click the bell to get notified when we go live. You can also sign up for the Lunchtime Discovery email newsletter. That way you can get the link to the video in your inbox every single week. Information for that is at the Office of Environmental Education's website, which is eenorthcarolina.org. And of course, you can follow the museum and them on all the social medias, or most of the social medias. We are at Natural Sciences, and you can follow the EE office at North Carolina EE. So I hope that we'll see you online or in person sometime soon. Until then, folks, take care, stay safe, and I don't know, go find some of those fun YouTube videos of these animals breaching and let us know what you think. Take care, everybody. Bye.